By the way, 1 month after President Trump was inaugurated, in January 2017, stock prices of private prisons doubled. Doubled. Did you know that?
Yes, I did.
Now, did you know that in the last legislative session, Arkansas changed the designation of residential burglary from a non-violent to a violent offense? And those of us who are lawyers and judges know that that changes the sentencing grid and the sentencing dynamic. Please understand that at a certain point, we as people are going to have to ask ourselves, how long can we pretend that we don't know that this is not accidental? I mean, at a certain point, you have to begin to ask yourself, am I being rational if I say, I don't know why this is happening? And I would like to add one other thing, now go back to the panel. Please remember language. Do not call this senseless. Just because you don't like the sense does not mean it is nonsense. It simply is perverted sense. But it is the perverted sense that has always existed. If you had a slavery system where you had millions of people enslaved to work for free, and that was on purpose, and it took a war to end the liberation of those, and then you had millions of people who were formerly working for free no longer producing stuff for free, how do you in the economy put that workforce back to work at the same economic method? Now, Representative Flowers,
Yes.
what do we need to do? Because see, I'm a judge, and I got this other job as a preacher, and I keep telling folks, you know, whether you're a judge or a preacher, it doesn't do any good to talk to folks about what you don't like if you don't tell them what you want them to do before they leave. You know, there's got to be, there's got to be a, in the church they call it an altar call. At the courthouse, you got to say, what you gonna do before I let you go to make me know that I didn't let you go, right? So what do you want people to do? I'm gonna ask each of the panelists this, so the rest of you get ready. What do you want this body to do based upon what they are doing here? Because this is not cartoons. You know, we're not talking about, watch this and then walk up and go play your marbles or something. You want something to happen done. What do you want people to do?
So I'll mention a few things because everybody can't do the same thing. Everybody doesn't want to do the same thing or have a capacity to do the same thing. So we'll talk about a few options. The first thing I would like to speak to, and you just made a point that language matters. I want to kind of go back to my point about the dehumanization of people once they become criminals / prisoners. And then we also heard about the disparities for Black and brown people to be in prison and be defined as prisoners. But the other point I'll make is that along with that dehumanization comes the commodification of those people. So you can't be dehumanized, you can't become a commodity and people feel like it's okay if you're not seen as less than human.
That's right.
Those two things go hand in hand. And so then, Judge Griffin, you talked about market forces. And so if we think about how the prison population, and for those of you who weren't able to see the snippet of the documentary called 13th, so this is the first thing you can do. Watch 13th. It's on Netflix, and I don't want to hear anyone say, well, I can't afford Netflix. Ask somebody who has Netflix for their password, because they can let about 5 to 10 people on their account. Watch Netflix, or watch 13th on Netflix. But in that documentary, throughout, they sort of lay out this timeline where you can see some of the evolution of the policies, of the culture, of the rhetoric, of the laws and practices that took place that took us from 1972 with a prison population of 300,000 to a prison population of 2.3 million. So when we think about market forces and the commodification of inmates, there is no market for private prisons or even benefiting from prison labor if you don't go from 300,000 to 2.3 million. And so, and just to give you some context, in 1972, the population, the total population in the United States was 210,000.
210.
I'm sorry, 210 million. I forgot to add these other zeros. I put million on the other one. Yes, thank you. But in 2019, 328 million. Now, that's a 64% growth, right? That's a lot of people. But from 300,000 to 2.3 million, it's a 767% growth.
It's not every
7 times, almost 8 times.
Exponential.
Right? So it doesn't fit. So anyone who thinks, well, it's more people, you know, of course we have more. Yeah, we would. But it's not equal. And so then it's like, well, gosh, how did we get there? Ooh, crime, you know, was rampant. No, it wasn't. From the 70s, there's been a pretty steady decline with a few dips, but a pretty steady decline in crime. It's not been a response. As a matter of fact, even in Arkansas, we changed sentencing guidelines, and then we changed rules and regulations that turn that back around so that Arkansas has the highest incarceration rate in the country. In a country that has the highest incarceration rate in the world.
We're number 1.
So how did that happen? How did we go from 300,000 to 2.3 million when there wasn't this explosion of crime? Policy.
That's right. Exactly.
Policy. And so we know that most of the people in prison in Arkansas and in this country are in prison for drug-related crimes. Even though we had a war on drugs ever since the Nixon administration, we probably were fighting more drugs, but we have more people in prison. And not only that, you have what you just heard about residential burglary becoming a violent crime. I just saw on Facebook a story about a Pennsylvania legislative proposal being pushed by prosecutors in that state to turn what is now, I guess, what you folks call torts, right? Torts. Where if you're poor, because this would be for poor people. I don't even have to read the whole article, even though I did, to know, I wouldn't have to do that to know that a law like this would not be applied to wealthy people. So if you have a lease from a place like Rent-A-Center and you fall behind on your lease, they want that to be turned into a crime. To go to prison.
A jailable offense.
A jailable offense. So now you have someone who's poor, who falls into hard times, like maybe, for instance, they don't work for 2 months because there's a government shutdown, because wealthy people decide they want to fight over immigration laws that have nothing to do with those folks doing their jobs. But I digress. Those are the kinds of policies that have turned 300,000 into 2.3 million. So you watch 13. The second thing you can do is be aware of, get involved in policies. Even if you don't become a policy wonk, if you don't like, you don't have to show up at the Capitol, but if you can do. If we aren't aware of what's going on and how these policies are impacting our state, you may be a hardliner and say if somebody commits a crime, they have to do the time. Okay. Still, there is a cost to the state. There is a cost to our economy. We pay for prisons. Even if we lease folks out, we're still paying. So think about this as a policy issue and be more active and engaged in what happens, because all of it is related. We say we don't have the money to pay people for their labor so that we can be a state and a country that makes no exceptions for the enslavement of people. But yet, we have a multi-billion-dollar federal tax cut and a multi-million-dollar over a period of 5 years now, tax cut in our state. So on 2 levels, I didn't do it, but some people just passed a tax cut that will largely benefit the highest paid 1%. Yeah. It takes 50% plus 51 votes in the House to repeal taxes. Even though in this case it was a little different, but that's really all that's needed. It takes 3/4, 75 votes to create a new tax. So when you're taking resources, when you're removing government resources, you pay a price. So all of these people losing benefits, providers not being paid for treating developmentally disabled, behavioral, mental health, those are all cuts. So we're cutting health care, among other things. We still don't have enough money for the highway bill. And by the way, they're going to send that out to you to agree to tax yourself. So people will be paying a higher sales tax, but the wealthy will get a tax cut. All of that is policy. All of it is important.
And if I may add, you just heard Brother Lee several minutes ago say that a lot of people in prison have mental health issues.
Yes.
You heard a lot of people are victims of our war on drugs. Most of the folks who show up in state court on those offenses are indigent. Did you know that the treatment facilities that provide drug rehab got cut last month by the Hutchinson administration? They got cut. Now, understand, she's talking about what?
Policy.
Policy is never accidental. Policy is never accidental. Policy is always intentional. And please understand something. One of the things you learn in law school is humans are presumed to intend the logical consequences of their conduct. If you know you have a population that has higher mental health issues, and you know that substance abuse contributes to your incarceration issue, and you know that most of your people who are going into prison are getting arrested, you know, issues are indigent. What is the effect? What is the logical effect of cutting funds for treatment providers that service that population? It means that the drug courts you say you set up will not have resources to send to people who go to drug courts. Okay? Oh, by the way, you don't say oops if you intended to do it. You only say oops if it was an accident.
Can I ask everyone to either write down or put in your phone a website? You know, this way you don't have to rely on the interpretation and Facebook posts. You can go to see legislation yourself. You can see who serves on committees. You can see video of committee proceedings, on floor proceedings. The website for the legislature is www. I still do that. Yes, I'm old. ARCLEG, ARKLEG, .state.ar.us. On that site, every day you can see what the calendar is, when the meetings take place, what room, what the agenda is, who's on the committee, what bills are on the agenda, if there's a special order of business. Those are the things. You can go to the profiles of legislators and see what bills they have filed. And it's live streamed too. And I want to recognize my colleague, Representative Monty Hodges from Clydeville. But at least you can start there. And I want to encourage you, find out, because most people don't know, find out who represents you.
Ooh.
Find out who represents you. You can do a quick search, who is my state legislator? And likely what will come up is a site called Open States. You put in your address, it'll tell you who your state senator is and who your state rep is. If you're here in law school, and that's what, a 3-year sentence?
Whoa, 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 whoa.
3 beautiful years.
Professor Cummings.
Or 4
I don't want
part-time.
you, Professor Cummings, I do not want you to be given the title of a warden.
But I just want to encourage you all, register to vote here. So that's my next thing. I have 5. First one is March 13th. Second is get engaged and involved and become aware of policy that affects us all. Third thing is vote. How you vote affects the outcomes of the policies directly. It affects judicial elections, who's making decisions on the circuit level, on the appellate level, at the Supreme Court in the state, dare I say even the Supreme Court of the United States. So you can have a strategy to exercise or practice whatever side you practice on. You still have to go before people who are supposed to be impartial and knowledgeable and make decisions that are in the best interest, that follow the law and that are in the best interest of the state. And
Okay, watch Netflix, policy, where, vote.
Vote, yes.
Number 4.
Okay, I'm a hurrier. Language matters. Stop saying slaves. This goes back to dehumanization. When we refer to history, let's stop calling people slaves. They're people who were enslaved. They're human beings. And the 5th thing. Let's stop thinking that this is an issue that is specific only to African American men. Obviously, there are disparities, and those disparities are important in discussions about justice and discussions about race. Most people who are in prison and who actually get punished for committing crimes are poor. Many of them have mental illness. Many of them have been failed by systems, by parents, and that's not to say that people shouldn't be held accountable for their actions, but then everybody should.
That's right.
whether, you know, so you heard some of the disparities. It's not just a problem with black men. When you think about it, if we're talking about 2.3 million and a little over 50% are black and brown, that means 40-something% are white.